I'm Trey Davis, Executive Director of Community Forklift. Many of you know us, some of you may not. We're a building material reuse nonprofit in Edmonston, Maryland, and we serve the entire DC region. I'm pleased today to introduce to you Carl Elefante. He is an architect and author. You may know Carl's famous quote, "The greenest building is one that's already built." I think that's one that all of us in here firmly believe and live by. Carl has been a leader in architecture, in preservation, and sustainable design in many, many aspects. He is principal emeritus of Quinn Evans. He's past president of AIA. He's the 2024 recipient of the AIA Firm Award. He is a senior fellow with Architecture 2030. He's a charter member of the Climate Heritage Network, and he's a fellow both with AIA and the Association for Preservation Technology International. What you may not know is that Carl was also among the founding board members of Community Forklift 20 years ago. And so I would not be here, Community Forklift would not be here without Carl. He and his family, it may come as no surprise, he practices what he preaches. They are frequent customers and solid supporters of Community Forklift, often in our warehouse. Carl and I were chatting last night a little bit about his efforts at AAA to move the needle on reuse, to get more people engaged and involved in thinking about reuse. And that's something that he's done in every part of his career, both and as a volunteer. In part of my previous role at Urban Land Institute, I was responsible for the publishing arm. So I worked with a lot of authors. As Kira said yesterday, writing is a bit of a volunteer effort. It's not something people do unless they are passionate about the topic and helping people to learn. I'll be very curious to get Carl's feeling on that and see if he agrees. He just released in April, Going for Zero, a book on decarbonizing the built environment. So I won't keep you from Carl. I'd like to invite him up here now, and please join me in welcoming Carl Elefante.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I feel like I'm kind of coming home. Let's see. I'm going to try pressing a button here and see what happens. Nothing happened. Anybody have any idea to actually how to get the slides to project? I see them. You don't see them. There we go. And it looks like I have a little something to press here. There's a little project thingy. Does somebody know how to get into presentation view? I'm sorry, what am I looking for? View. Not grid view.
Layout?
That's slide layout.
Strange.
Mm.
So sorry.
This is all completely different here.
Yeah, I don't know. So it's through Teams. I don't know if, did you try?
Well, we're sharing our screen here.
Is anybody a Teams expert? I'm sorry. Bottom right? Don't see anything on the bottom right. What happens? Maybe the three dots here. I'm sorry. I have no idea how to.
Yeah.
Hi, folks. With
Thank you so
Almost there.
much. Thank you. Okay. Yep. Forward and back. I'm so sorry.
Well, I'm sorry to say that's the most interesting part of my presentation. Everything else is downhill from here, but again, I'm delighted to be here. An awful lot of the reason why I wrote a book was because there are people that kind of share a view of the importance of building use and reuse, material use and recycling and deconstruction, et cetera, that understand the life cycle of buildings in a way that really is not understood broadly. It just isn't. And I can say, as having been president of AIA, that the percentage of architects that really understand that they're part of a life cycle that goes on for generations is extremely small. And so what I hope to do today is to have you not just feel reinforced in what you're doing, but recognizing that we need your voices in the broader world to say, we understand a thing about this life cycle of buildings that is not understood broadly, and it's hurting everyone in many, many important ways. And so I really want to recruit all of you to be guerrillas in this warfare of really getting it right about the importance of investing the huge amount of material and energy and effort that we put into making the built environment to really be meaningful way beyond what we're doing this mortgage cycle or even this generation. So I'm going to talk a lot about things from my book, and this statement I think is the number one takeaway that I hope that everybody gets from my book, and that is we're really experiencing a relevance revolution for what it means to shape the built environment. And that requires, though, that we really change what we're doing. That if we keep doing what we've been doing for the last 80 years, it's 80 years since the end of World War II, that we won't find a sustainable future. We won't find a resilient future. We'll just keep polluting the world. We'll keep running to the edge of the cliff. And then we have to go, this mode shift really means understanding that we need to reintegrate and heal what's been created over the last largely 80 years. So let's talk about that relevance revolution a little bit. And I just want to just also say that I've been a practicing architect. I've been a practicing historic preservation architect, but I've also had the opportunity to get out of the office. We're in very heads down work. It's very demanding. It's very hard to look up from your desk. Back in the day, we used to call them drawing boards when we actually drew on them, and to see the bigger picture of what's going on in the world around us. I got to do that. And I got to do that partially, literally my day job, my heads down job as a historic preservation architect, trying to create a new thing that we called sustainable preservation. And there was no market for it. Literally, when we started to say, this is what we want to do, this is our mission to have sustainability and preservation intersect, there was no client out there saying, where is a sustainable preservation architect for me to hire? So my day job was to get out there and create a market for what we were doing. So it gave me the opportunity to look at the horizon. And I spent a lot of the last 30 years looking at the horizon. And I know that in this world, it's very hard to do. It's so hard to get through the day, to get through the week. And I really was blessed to have that opportunity. So I want to kind of, give you my, my travel log from that journey. So one way to define the relevant revolution that we're all experiencing today is that there are three 21st century imperatives the justice imperative, the climate imperative, and the urban imperative. And I would assume that everybody gets the climate imperative. They don't really have to talk about that much. But I want to really help us understand how that relates to the justice and the urban imperative. Not coincidentally at all, there happened to be 3 UN conferences held within about a year, 16 months of each other in 2015 and 2016, one devoted to each one of those imperatives. The first was the Sustainable Development Summit, the General Assembly held in New York City, and many of you are probably familiar with the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that came out of that effort. I just add that it's a continuum of the work that was done by the Brundtland Commission back in the 80s and the publication of Our Common Future. This idea that economic and environmental and social issues intersect, they're not separable. If you're going to solve one, you have to solve the others. I'll just note that somehow or another, homelessness and housing as a right got left out. We need to do something about that. Of course, the second one was the Paris Summit, where the Paris Agreement on Climate Change was signed, and the notion that there are a couple of really, really important criteria that we need to be paying attention to, capping global warming and getting decarbonization accomplished quickly, that came out of that summit. And then the last one, and believe it or not, in the architectural world, the least known, is the New Urban Agenda that came out of Habitat 3, the UN summits that are conducted at 20-year intervals to look at what is going on with human habitation. And Habitat 3 was devoted to the urban agenda because the 21st century is defined first and foremost as the urban century. At the beginning of this century, for the first time in human history, more than half the people in the world lived in urban settings. By the end of the century, UN estimates there are as many as 9 in 10 people will. And so for those of us in the building environment world, it sends us a message. Every problem is an urban problem. Every solution must be an urban solution. So shaping human habitation intersects with absolutely everything. And I just want to end this by saying that this isn't just what bureaucrats at the UN are talking about. Literally, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who served both a Republican president, George W. Bush, and a Democratic president, Barack Obama, said global unsustainability is the biggest threat to the security of the United States of America. So it's not just theory. So what do we do about this? And I want to start by saying we have to move beyond the modern era, that the modern era was shaped largely after World War II. The world has changed so much since actually tomorrow, August 6th, 1945, when the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima and brought the rapid end of the Second World War. It's been 80 years. The world is almost unrecognizable from what it was 80 years ago. And why do I say we need to get beyond modern? The number one thing in the Biden administration real value of cities are. And all human progress, all human productivity has come from people coming together to form communities that we call cities and working together on common problems and being more productive by working together. That's why cities exist. That's why they exist today. And it's a lesson that we've forgotten. And we just really need to rediscover it. Cities are not for cars. They're for people, progress, and production. And the modern city that we have today is really has been shaped by two generations of thinking about the modern world. The first was what we oftentimes in a place like St. Paul, you would call the City Beautiful movement, that these urban reformers who looked at the squalor of cities. To give you an idea, New York City went from 30,000 people to almost 1 million in 60 years. New York City in 1860 was absolute squalor. It was literally fatal to live there. 2/3 of the deaths were caused by infectious disease, preventable infectious disease, because the environment was so foul. And this was a generation that established the AIA, that looked at those cities and said, we can do better. We can make beautiful cities. We can make cities that are uplifting. And it also happened in places like Paris, where, Haussmann created the Paris that we look at today. That generation was followed by a second generation that were not just they were not urban reformers, they were urban rejectionists. They truly believed that cities were evil places, they were foul, they were dark and dangerous and full of criminals, etc. And the sort of two modes of development that have taken place after World War II were set in motion after World War I by people like Le Corbusier, that believed that we needed to build 60-story towers and bulldoze Paris, and people like Frank Lloyd Wright that believed that we could just live in the country somehow. And by the way, flying cars was part of his solution. And today, people are trying to create Modern City 3.0 with visions of sugar plums dancing in their heads. That 50-story skyscrapers was not the solution. We need 100-story skyscrapers. And I'll at least give Vincent Cayabo some credit that maybe glass office buildings are not the only building type. But these are, do we really think that this is the solution for 21st century cities? It's absurd. Where are the people in these visions? How are we building cities for people? And the rest of my presentation, I want to turn to this notion of, if the past teaches, what does the future learn? And as a historic preservation architect, I got to be a student of historic buildings. And what I found is that I started my career doing that I was going to fix those old buildings. I was going to green them. And what I learned from 30 years of working with them is that they had more lessons to teach us about how to make good buildings in the modern era than the modern era had to make them better buildings. So I went 180 degrees, and I feel like we need to do this writ large. So the first lesson I want to share with you is that performance follows form. And there's a lot of versions of that architects like to talk about. Which are we building? Are we building sailboats that move on the wind? Or are we building rust buckets that burn coal to make them move? And our buildings are rust buckets. You unplug them and they are literally uninhabitable. They don't have operable windows, et cetera, et cetera. This is our model for progress. This is what we think good buildings are. We're on drugs, man. We are addicted to fossil fuels to think that is the solution to buildings. And some modernists got this. And my favorite example of this is Buckminster Fuller and his talk about energy slaves. A lot of people know Fuller for his how much does your building weigh? Really asking, what are we valuing when we're thinking about designing buildings? And one of the things that literally would wake him up in the middle of the night in a sweat was he recognized the number of energy slaves that we had built into our modern world. And that the energy slaves pushing our cars, the energy slaves fueling our buildings. There's only one person that I know, Barnabas Calder, who is teaching architecture as energy flows, not as stylistic development. Can we please just be more thoughtful about how we're looking at the heritage building stock? Heritage building stock is an absolute encyclopedia of how to build buildings adapted to their environments. And this is my favorite example, Longwood Plantation, that's in Natchez, Mississippi, built for a hot, humid climate to have induced ventilation, just built into the building. that the stratification of cool air and warm air creates airflow through this building when there's not a breath of air, which is like 360 days a year in Natchez, to make it so that it's an habitable space. The simplest human habitation has been some of the most sophisticated climate adapted habitations ever been built. I'm glad to say some modern architects actually get this and understand that they can design facades that are oriented to the sun and make sense in terms of their solar performance, and that things like induced ventilation can actually be part of a modern, air-conditioned building. There's hope. The other part of this that I just wanted to point to for a minute is that the other thing that we get wrong is the idea of what is human comfort. The idea that human comfort is setting a thermostat in the building to have the whole building be 70 degrees and 50% relative humidity 365 days a year is insane. And it doesn't even have anything to do with human well-being. Our bodies adapt to our environment. If it's 65 degrees in January, why do you wear shorts and a t-shirt? And if it's 65 degrees in July, why do you wear a sweater? It's because your body has adapted to your climate. You actually do that on a daily basis. And the one other thing I want to say about this is our psychrometric charts, engineers out there, our psychrometric charts have two factors. They have the factors of air temperature and humidity. That's it. The other three factors of human comfort that the Olge brothers identified back when this was just beginning to be thought about aren't even included, including radiant heat. And 85% of your body temperature is modified through radiation, not convection and conduction. So we're even ignoring the most important factor in our designing comfortable buildings for people. And if you get a takeaway from this, please look into Susan Roth's work, the Comfort at the Extremes conference that's held every year. Just Google Kate and look into people that are actually getting serious about what would designing for adaptive comfort look like in beyond modern buildings. Of course, I have to talk about the greenest building. And as we all know, the greenest building is one that is already built. And, I won't spend a lot of time on this, but, I've had a lot of people say to me, do you really mean that? You better believe I mean that. And it is very evidenced in many, many ways. This is not just a philosophical statement. There's a lot of science to back it up. So this is the kind of work that I've done. And you look at these restored buildings and you go, oh, of course these buildings are valued. Look at how beautiful they are. That's so cool. Wow, that's just what a great building. I just want you to know 3 of those 4 buildings are threatened with demolition. We throw buildings out like there's no tomorrow. The construction waste in this country by tonnage is double all municipal waste combined. The construction waste and demolition waste in this country by tonnage is double all municipal waste combined. You think we throw buildings out like we're stupid? We do. I know, Lillian Wong at RISD that's really teaching this idea of renewal as design, so that architects that went to architecture school like me because they wanted to design new cool stuff could understand that you could reuse a building, and that would be designing new cool stuff. Literally, mainstreaming building reuse in architecture school is something that is still far from complete. In fact, it's barely started. And I'm happy to say that there is recognition of this, that the 2021 Pritzker Prize laureates, are building rescuers. So there is some recognition of it. But now I really want to bring this home to what we do and the importance that you bring to talking about circularity. I've talked about modern era bias in a lot of different ways. And one of the ways I want to talk about it is in terms of circularity. Our modern era bias ideas about circularity are wrong. They're just incomplete. It's this notion that McDonough came up with. We have biological cycle and technical cycle. I would argue that the technical cycle only works for one set of materials known as metals. All the rest of them, it's a dream. It's not a reality. Many things that we recycle, we actually downcycle. Even biological recycling, that circularity of that, it's very incomplete. It's very unproven. We understand how difficult it is to take a material out of the building and get somebody to put it in a new building and to have it be as valuable as it was before we took it out. Will you please go out and preach that, how hard this is? And let's not be smoking pot about how cool it is to recycle stuff when we're not really doing it. We have to get this message out there. And I just want to give you the example of, here are two icons of the pre-World War II Modern City 1.0 and the post-World War II Modern City 2.0. The Empire State Building got a LEED Gold certification for its renovation about 15 years ago. 2/3 of the facade had to be, wait for it, washed. Okay. The other third was windows, which were all the same size, got taken out, shipped to a floor in the building, restored, put back up. The building on the right, the 21st century modern icon in New York City, in 50 years, that whole facade is going to be taken off because it's going to leak and the sealants are going to fail and it's going to get thrown in the landfill and it's going to be replaced with a new facade. 100%. That's sustainable? Which one of these is more sustainable? We're being told that the one on the right is the icon of sustainable future. And you see that image from New York City of the 100-story buildings. Oh, let's do more of these. No, let's not do more of these. This is not sustainable technology. It's just not. And so we have to understand that we're part of this whole building life cycles and that buildings are these onions of usability and onions of layers of the Stuart Brandt's word for this was the shearing layers of building life cycle. This needs to be built into our building codes. It needs to be built into the design mindset of every architect working on every building. Climate change. And guess what? There happens to be a real correspondence between how that onion works and where the carbon is invested into buildings. Most of that carbon goes into the very, very heavy construction of steel and concrete that make the superstructure of the building, that make the superstructure of a building that has to be fireproof. It has to be earthquake proof. It has to be bomb proof. It has to be storm proof. So our safety requires that we build very, very durable buildings. And are we doing that with knowledge of how to have those buildings still be valuable 200 years from now? And the answer is no, we're not. So this is the modern era building. This is how it is being recycled today. In fact, Quinn Evans' office in Washington is in this building. So we're stripping it down to the concrete. So is that good? Believe it or not, I'm here today to say, you know what? It's a reality of the way these buildings were built. And what do I mean by that? I'll give you an example of a project that we did at Quinn Evans. So here's this building, very similar, 12-story building, office building that we converted to apartments. This is the embodied carbon footprint, or as Roy Alter would like us to call it, the upfront carbon emissions that represented in the skin of that building, the space plan, the stuff inside the building, and then the structure of that building. And when you start to look at this as a life cycle emissions, let's compare a retrofit versus a replacement scenario. So you have to start by what's our baseline. Our baseline is what are we going to save? What is the operational emissions that that building's already doing? How are we going to reduce that in a life cycle way? And so that's our baseline. So we start by replacing the skin of the building. We convert the building to apartment buildings. It's to apartments. So there's kitchens and bathrooms and all the new interior stuff. And that's the embodied emissions that are in the building before we even start to occupy it. And then when we occupy it, we start to burn not clean fuel, not clean electricity, and there you go, we're polluting more carbon pollution. But in the end, we've avoided emissions, and even with a not very good performing building, we're beginning to see net avoided emissions in 8 years. Well, what happens if we just tore that building down and replaced it? We would have to replace it with all that structure. And look at how much bigger the embodied carbon footprint is now. Now we start to operate that building. And after 20 years, we've actually avoided no carbon at all. So we're saving the world by doing absolutely nothing. We have to get smarter than this. There are many, many ways to deal with that era of those modern era buildings. And so here's, Lever House. We're going to make it look just the way it did because it's an important design. Celebrezzi building in Cleveland, where they reclad the existing building with a second skin, and then Green Wyatt, where it was replaced with this interesting looking facade. What that interesting looking facade is a design that is for its solar orientation. So look at all the shading on the west to reduce solar gain. Just by doing the facade design to respond to the solar orientation, saved about a third of the reduction in energy consumption of this building. A third of it was from just simply the design of the curtain wall. It cost almost nothing. The only thing it cost was some brain cells to think about the solar orientation of the building. So architects, really? Solar orientation? That's a really hard concept? Come on, we got to get to it. And why is this important? Why am I dwelling so much on modern era buildings? Because 60% of the building stock that we're dealing with was built since the end of World War II. We can't throw these buildings out. We have to find a way to reuse them. And the other lesson I just want to say is don't believe a word you read about how much growth there's going to be and we're going to double the building stock in the next between now and 2060. It's a lot of baloney written by people that want to sell you materials and give you loans. The second lesson I want to talk about, and again, this is really for this group, is the notion that permanence is architecture's superpower. And I mean it really in terms of measuring human lives. Buildings are permanent. They last for dozens of generations, hundreds of generations. And I don't just mean this romantically, that you can go walk through the baths of Caracalla. This is the city of Shaban in Yemen. If we would stop bombing it, it would still be there for another 1,000 years. This is a 1,000-year-old city that's made out of unfired clay block. So these are extremely durable buildings that last forever, absolutely forever, if we would just let them and take care of them. The other point I want to make, which is such an important part of the work you do, is that economic opportunity, affordability, is given to us by older buildings. There's no way to build affordability. Literally, the recycling of buildings after the building construction's already been paid for, that's what affordability comes from. And Jane Jacobs recognized this in 1961, another lesson we've forgotten. Another thing that we learned from building recyclers is that the work that's done to recycle buildings and maintain buildings is very green work. It doesn't have a lot of materials. We're not buying a lot of stuff from China. We're employing people that have skills, that are working on site. They have good jobs. It's minimum energy, expenditure, et cetera. This is a smart way to do things. It is much smarter than what you get from building new. And Storm Cunningham did this work 25 years ago, talking about the tilting between the development economy and the restoration economy. And that literally globally, the restoration economy is on a path to simply be bigger than the new development economy. Let's preach that lesson. Let's make sure that people understand that. And the importance of this in what it means to be reintegrating our cities that were literally torn apart intentionally with racism as one of the guiding principles behind it. That's what our post-World War II modern city 2.0 was built to do. This was not some unintentional habit that resulted in this. This is intentional. And what it actually takes to heal a city is so straightforward. And I really recommend the work of Mindy Thompson Full of Love to sort of teach us these lessons of understanding that you really want to understand how to build a community for people. How about talking to the people that live there? They have a much more nuanced understanding of where they live than you do. I don't care how many degrees you have. Go talk to them. Use Mindy Thompson's Main Street stroll and scroll and learn about their community the way they see it. So I just want to end by saying we need to, reconnect with the outcomes of our work. And what you do is such an important window on this. You really understand the fallacies of what the conventional ideas about what progress looks like. You know better. We need to teach that. And I just want to talk on two topics. The first is our addiction to toxic energy. Fossil fuels is a marketing term. They're not fossil fuels. They're poisonous. They're explosive. They're flammable. They kill people every year in things like natural gas explosions in apartment buildings. And where I live in Montgomery County, Maryland, there have been 3 catastrophic explosions in 1960 era apartment buildings in the last 10 years. It's not theory. This is the reality of what it means to put toxic fuels piped into every building. We know better. And not only that, we're polluting everything. We're polluting the air, the land, the sea, even underground. To have whale oil to be able to use in our lamps, and that's what it is. And the clean energy alternative, you hear people talk about, oh, those windmills going to block my view. There's nothing that even compares between the damage that's done with our pumping toxic fuels compared to these green energy technologies that we're faced with today. There's just no comparison. Get on the right side of this equation. And then the last thing I want to mention is literally construction workforce abuse. That for us to have an equitable place for people to come and work on our buildings, we're a long way from it today. And one of the main reasons is our inability to have a migration policy in this country that makes any sense. For the last 30 years, every major Thank you. Every major construction association has been begging Congress to have a sensible migration legislation for construction workers because we have a quote unyielding construction labor shortage. And it's not about to get better, it's about to get worse. And not only that, it's also reflective of our industry right now. We have global supply chains on almost everything. If you read Lloyd Alter's book about embodied emissions, trying to document where the emissions come from in a building today or even a product today, these global supply chains are very opaque, and in every one of them, there's abuse. For you to try to do a building today that's abuse-free, it's almost impossible. And I really recommend that you look at the work that Grace Farms has done, their Design for Freedom campaign. Sharon Prince, a billionaire that actually thinks that maybe spending money on making the world a better place instead of making chandeliers in big ballrooms is maybe a better way to spend your money. So look at the work that Grace Farms is doing. And I just want to end by saying that there were some brilliant people in the 20th century that recognized that the world was getting smaller, it was really shrinking, and that we were really at a point where we had to start thinking about the well-being of the whole human race everywhere as something that we could practically achieve, and also that something that we sort of couldn't avoid doing because there just simply is no way. Look at the migration crisis that took place in Syria because of the droughts in Syria in 2005 to 2012. That completely rewrote the political map of Europe. That was 6 million people being disrupted by a climate-related drought. The Biden administration estimated that by 2050, there'll be 140 million climate refugees in the world. And that 6 million rewrote the map in Europe, imagine what 140 million climate refugees looks like. We can't think of the well-being of ourselves alone. We have to be thinking about the well-being of the whole human race. And we have to do that one salvaged board at a time. I mean, literally, that's our job. Our value proposition is we understand there's a different way of doing things. And our job is to embrace this, to understand that the relevance revolution is thrust upon us by destiny. We can't decide that we don't want to do it. You know, literally, history is asking us to do this. And our job is to go inspire change. There's a lot of talk now about we need to resist, and there's a lot of resisting that we need to do. But the most important resistance is to show what a brighter future looks like and how to get there. And you understand a very important part of that about valuing things that we have in a way that will make a more affordable, a more accessible future for a lot of people that don't have a lot of options. So you have a very important part to play in bringing that better future about. So thank you so much for letting me be here today. And I have no idea what's supposed to happen now. Yeah. Questions, comments? Right here. You kept nodding a lot, so you get the first question. Yeah, so it's a great question. So big commercial buildings, millions of residential buildings. Actually, here in this country, we have a very unique version of that. 62% of our building stock by area, not by number, by area, is single family residential. Okay. So we just, talk about a glut of fossil fuels. We have a glut of a kind of grossly overbuilt residences. So it's a big challenge what to do with them. I do think that inevitably there will be a lot of demolition in single family world. I just want you to know that politically, that is third rail. That is absolutely a third rail. And just point to my experience in Montgomery County, where we really tried to tackle this back in 2010 to 2012. And the county council was like, your guys are great. We love everything you're talking about, but don't touch the single family residential because those are our voters and we'll never get voted into office again if we do anything about that. So it was complete. It took about another almost 10 years to get accessory dwelling units to become part of the county code. So I do think that a lot of that's going to happen. The only other thing I would just say as a factor in that is that also those buildings are probably the best candidates for easily making them very sustainable buildings. We can put solar panels on them, we can insulate them, we can do whatever to really make them perform well. You notice I didn't say replace the windows. But so there's a lot of work that we can do to really make them quite self-sufficient. And I actually think the future of the single family residential is to find ways to densify the neighborhoods and to actually add interest to the neighborhoods, instead of them being completely, just single crop. But I do think that we really need to be thinking about that. And one of the things I want to say about it is that every city that I know of in this country is too big. It has sprawled out too far. We need to start talking about not just tearing houses down to make 8-story condos, but where do we start to take residential neighborhoods back and return it to nature? Because our balance with nature is absolutely insane. We're hurting ourselves as well as the planet. I saw another hand here.
Do you think this is
Yeah, so the question is whether there's a similar, modern era bias in the idea of clean energy and so on. There's a very, very deep modern era bias in essentially everything that we consider to be a conventional and good idea. There just is. And we have to be much, much more rigorous about trying to get to real solutions. And I'll just recommend there's an exhibit that was done for the 2018 Biennale by Diller Scafidia Renfro called, oh my gosh, just flew out of my head, In Plain Sight, I think it's called, but that looked at nighttime satellite images of the world and like, oh, look at all the bright areas, that's where all the people live. Like, no, not all of them. And my favorite example is the coal mine the copper mine in the Congos. This copper mine is so big, it's like New York City. It's this huge thing, like equal a metropolitan area. And it's 2,000 miles away from its source of electricity, which is a dam on the Congo River. Okay. Those lines, 2,000 kilometers, excuse me, those lines travel over 2 million people. Those people have no access to that electricity. So there's just really, really big, oh, that's World Bank money because the World Bank is going to do development. It's going to make the world a better place. Yeah, well, if you want copper, it's a better place. But if you want electricity in your home, maybe it's not.
What are the alternatives to windows? I got an 1833 house that needs new windows or needs something.
You need to fix them up and add storm windows to them. Yep. You know. Yep.
Any other questions? Oh,
Clean energy, so I noticed in the bottom right, you have waste and energy. I wonder if you can talk about you want that.
So I think there's actually a big future for it. The one that I showed, which is the famous one in Copenhagen, is one where they're basically using municipal waste as the source of waste that they're burning. We really have a waste problem in this world. We also really have an energy problem in this world. And I think efforts to try to bring those two things together are definitely worth working on. There's a lot of things like that we're spending all our money trying to defend pumping more oil in this country instead of trying to figure out what alternative options are for the future. Let's spend a little time and effort at what the opportunities and options are for the future. I think that's one of them.
question about the staff. You mentioned that, I'm in the way back here. You mentioned that it's maybe a bit of a misrepresented number that the square footage of developed land is going to double. I think we are all really used to hearing that stat repeated at us, and I would love any sources you can provide to help start refuting that number.
Yeah, so read my book. You'll find that and a lot of other things in it. A shameless plug. But so consider this source. It's coming from people like the World Bank who want to loan money for development. They want to see development happen. And look, there's places, right now, something like, oh, I forget the exact number, but I want to say it's something like two-thirds of the population growth in the world is going to be in Africa in the next 40 years. So the idea that Africa is actually going to go through really incredible growth is probably quite true. In places like the United States of America or other countries in Europe that are part of what's called the global north, population is flat and in fact declining. In the United States, population has only increased over the last 30 years as a result of immigration. Somebody want to tell that to the president? So we have flat population in this room. Why do we need to double our building stock if our population is flat? And by the way, also in my lifetime, between 1950 and now, Our families have gotten more than a person smaller. We've gone from 3.9 people in a family to 2.3 people in a family. And our buildings, our houses have gotten 3 times bigger. They've gone from 900 square feet per house to 2,400 square feet per house. So why do we need to double our space? We need to use the space that we're using at least twice as well as we're currently using it. So it just that's the kind of thing that it's baked into these things by people that want to sell us things, that want to loan us money, that the growth economy is how they see the future. And the actual facts of not only how many of us there are, but literally the quality of life of how we live. And this is another thing in Lloyd Alter's book that I really recommend, but by mine first, but just literally this notion of sufficiency where, if we don't first define what we're really trying to do with how we live, then how do we know what we want to build for? So let's get some idea about how we want to live. And I'd point to people like the Congress for the New Urbanism saying, what do we really want our cities to be like? We want them to be, really rewarding to walk down the street. We want them to be places where you can get to know your neighbors. Mindy Fullalove's rules of what it takes to make a good community. A community you feel part of, and you know your neighbors, and you do things together. You solve problems together. There's no like how many gold chandeliers you need in that formula. So let's figure that out before we figure out how much building we need to do.
All right, one more question.
Thanks again.
We have one more question, so sorry.
You can do it from there. So I just want to thank you. That was incredible. I have so many questions. So I'm just going to pick one. And I used to go to UC Berkeley. I'm going to hate myself when Sim Mandarin was a professor. And you remind me a lot of, your talk that reminds me a lot of what he was saying back in the early 90s. And we were extremely inspired. So many different, ideas came out of that, and the environmental movement was on its way. The ecological design movement was going crazy, and then it just disappeared. How, you just presented me what it feels like 30 years ago. How do we prevent that from happening? How do we prevent the next 30 years, falling on deaf ears? I think you kind of touched on it a little bit, and I'm gonna read your book, yeah. But like, if there's like one sentence or something that you could give us that like, how can we avoid the pitfalls that we ran into with recycling and quote unquote rebuilding?
So I'm going to go back. Actually, I guess we'll use the microphone. I'm just going to go back to how I ended, and that is that I think that there's that we sort of assumed that people would understand what doing the right thing is, and we were just wrong. They just it's like, hey, I can get a cool new pickup truck, I actually feel like my generation, which is the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement in Vietnam, et cetera, that we got so beat down that we finally went, hey, you know what? I can get a BMW. It's cool. And I can just enjoy myself. And that's sort of what happened. So I think our job is to live well, is to really show that living in a community where you get to know your neighbors and that you're not locked up in your 3,000-pound suit of armor all day, every day. That we need to inspire the change by being the change, by really showing what the benefits of it are. And unfortunately, what you're talking about, I mean, the direction that changed from the Sim Vanderim era, we're in a way deeper pit today, much, much deeper pit. And finding that common ground, I think, is really going to be a challenge. And I think that it's there's times when we have to be forceful, and there's times that we really have to fight. And I mentioned, the whole fossil fuel thing. I mean, please look into the supply chain that you're using. Start to pay attention to these things. So there's fighting that we need to do. But I actually think the most important thing we need to do is to show a better way. And again, you guys do that. It's not just important in terms of salvaging building materials. It's important in having a set of values about we honor the things that we've received from previous generations. And what we're here to do is to not throw them in a landfill, but to figure out a way to honor them forward by having a new value, to having continued value to them. And it's not like we're taking concrete building and we're making rubble. That's not valuing, but it's literally finding new ways that really these materials are considered to be precious and they're treated that way. So let's just live well and inspire people by the way we live.